Welcome to Whisper's Secrets. Part 1. Signs. He noticed the silence before he noticed the lies. Edward had always trusted silence more than words. Silence didn't lie. It simply was. It didn't cover, twist, or embellish. It just sat there, heavy, pure, waiting to be interpreted. It was in the silence where he found his answers. In numbers. In order. In the rituals that made his life comfortably predictable. That was why the first sign wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a message on her phone or a lipstick smudge on someone else's shirt. It was the way her keys sounded when she dropped them in the bowl by the door. They used to clatter, thoughtlessly, with the careless certainty of someone coming home. But now, they landed quieter. Intentional. Like someone trying not to wake something. Or someone. He didn't say anything the first time he noticed. Or the second. Or the fifth. Instead, he filed it away in that compartmentalized mind of his, a mind that never stopped sorting data. And Laura? She kept going. Kept being normal. Just a slightly different version of it. The distance begins. The morning routines used to be chaotic, charming. Edward would be up before sunrise, prepping his coffee in quiet meditation while Laura stumbled into the kitchen with her wild bedhead and sleepy smile, mumbling something about dreams she couldn't remember. She'd wear mismatched socks and his old hoodie, dancing barefoot across the tiles to whatever tune was stuck in her head that week. That was the Laura he married. Now mornings felt like a movie set. She came in already dressed. Hair brushed. Socks matching. Not a note of a song on her lips. She smiled, sure. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a customer service smile. The kind you give a stranger you don't plan to see again. Edward's first instinct was to reason with it. People changed. Routines evolved. But the logic faltered when the anomalies began to multiply. Coffee mugs in the wrong cupboard. Half-used hotel toiletries in her gym bag. And perfume, subtle, not hers, something floral yet musky, the kind that lingered on his collar after they hugged. He didn't accuse her. He observed. He didn't speak. He calculated. The notebook. One Sunday morning, Edward sat at his desk with a fresh notebook. It was the kind with smooth ivory pages and a full leather cover. Laura had given it to him for his birthday 3 years ago. He hadn't used it. Until now. On the first page he wrote, "Observe deviations, Laura, March 11th. He underlined it twice. Then began listing. Key drops sound diminished. 4 occurrences. Phone usage up 31%, based on screen time data. Shift in wardrobe habits, increased red tones. Change in fragrance profile, external origin. Social outings increase without group verification. Decrease in physical contact. Last 2 weeks, 0 initiations from Laura." He stopped and stared at the page. Each bullet was like a beat of a drum in an approaching storm. Then he flipped to the next page and drew a timeline. It wasn't enough to list what changed. He needed to track when. He needed a pattern. Patterns revealed motivation. And motivation revealed truth. The dinner lie. Thursday used to be sushi night. They had a system. He'd order from the place 2 blocks over, she'd pour sake, and they'd argue over who got the last salmon roll. But that Thursday, Laura came home late. No explanation offered. Just a flat. "Work ran long." "No sushi?" he asked. "I wasn't hungry." No apology. No follow-up. The next week, it happened again. This time she claimed to be at a team-building event. Said it was mandatory. Edward, of course, checked the company calendar the next morning. No event scheduled. Not for her department. Not even in the building. Still, he didn't confront her. Instead, he opened his laptop and built a spreadsheet. He called it Interactions, L versus E. Each row represented a day. Each column tracked details, meals shared, kisses initiated, calls made, hours spent at home, new items of clothing, inconsistencies and alibis. Within 10 days he had something resembling a heat map of detachment. And it wasn't just detachment, it was erosion. The slow decay of familiarity. Like the tide pulling grains of a sandcastle until only wet ruins remained. Sarah's stumble. The first hard data came via an accident. Laura had said she was meeting the girls for wine on Friday night. She left dressed in black with her hair done in elegant waves. Edward, calm as ever, waited until her Uber pulled away. Then he drove, not to follow her, but to knock on Sarah's door. Sarah blinked at him, caught mid-pajamas, holding a glass of rose. "Edward?" she said, startled. "Hey. Laura said she was with you." A pause. "She what?" He smiled. "Girls' night?" Another pause. "Oh. Yeah, plans changed last minute. She mentioned maybe going to see her cousin. I wasn't sure." "Right. Makes sense. Thanks." He left before she could dig herself a deeper hole. Later that night, Laura came home smelling like wine and mint, humming softly under her breath. "How was Sarah?" "She's good," she replied. "Missed you, actually." Edward nodded, wondering if liars understood the difference between improvisation and performance. Shadows and mirrors. Over the next week, Edward reviewed their past. Not through memories, but through metadata. He pulled GPS history from their shared Google accounts. Most days, she was where she claimed. Except for two. Both involved an address in the city's upscale district, where boutique hotels nestled between art galleries and overpriced wine bars. He checked the locations. One was a hotel. The other was a bar they used to go to when they first started dating. That one stung. Nostalgia weaponized. He printed screenshots. Placed them in the notebook. Annotated them like crime scene photos. Meanwhile, Laura continued her play. She smiled. She kissed him goodnight. She laughed when he made dry jokes about spreadsheets. But the warmth was gone. She was reciting a script written by someone else. And Edward? Edward was planning a rewrite. The red dress. The dress changed everything. It was fire red, off-shoulder, sleek. It hung in their closet like a warning sign. Laura hadn't worn red in years, said it made her feel too visible, too loud. So when she stepped out wearing it one Saturday night and casually said, "Just dinner with the girls," he knew. Not suspected. Knew. She didn't even flinch when he complimented it. "You look beautiful." "Thanks," she said, checking her lipstick in the hallway mirror. Then she left. 15 minutes later, Edward got into his car. He didn't follow her directly. Instead, he went to the boutique hotel near the riverside, the same one that appeared on the GPS map 2 weeks prior. He parked across the street. Waited. At 8:22 p.m. he saw her. Not with Sarah. Not with any girls. With him. Ryan. The man. Ryan was charismatic in the way narcissists often were, well-dressed, overly confident, polished but hollow. Edward had met him twice before. Friend of a friend. One time at a housewarming. Another at Laura's office mixer. Edward had shaken his hand. He remembered thinking Ryan's grip was too firm, his smile too symmetrical. Now, Edward watched through the windshield as Ryan touched her back. Leaned in too close. Whispered things that made her laugh the way she used to laugh with him. He didn't feel rage. Not yet. That would come later. What he felt now was revelation. She wasn't just cheating. She was becoming someone else. Rewriting her own story without telling him the ending. Silence again. When she came home that night, she looked radiant. Guiltless. The glow of attention still on her skin. She dropped her keys into the bowl, this time loudly, like overcompensating. "Good night?" he asked from the couch, not looking up. She hesitated. "Yeah. Just wine and venting." "Sarah okay?" "She's been better. Still dealing with that breakup." He said nothing more. And neither did she. Later, in bed, she turned her back to him. He stared at the ceiling, counting the rotations of the fan blades. He didn't touch her. Didn't reach. Didn't breathe too deeply. She was the one who drifted off first. Part 2, doubt and distance. He didn't scream. He rewrote the script in silence. Monday morning came dressed in gray. Clouds hung low over the city skyline, lazy and bloated with the threat of rain. Edward sat at the breakfast table, freshly pressed shirt, untouched coffee, eyes tracing the path of condensation down the side of Laura's glass of orange juice. She didn't notice. She was on her phone, thumb flicking upward in lazy motions. A scroll, a smirk, another scroll. She hadn't said good morning. She hadn't even sat down facing him. Just perched sideways on the edge of the chair like a person halfway between staying and leaving. Edward studied her in silence. From the outside, they looked like a couple engaged in quiet routine. But from where he sat, it was two strangers living inside a play, one that had lost its audience and its meaning. "Big day?" he asked softly. Laura blinked, startled slightly, as if forgetting he was there. Oh. Yeah. Kind of. She didn't elaborate. He didn't push. Instead, he took a mental snapshot of the moment, the tone, the body language, the vagueness, and filed it away in the ever-thickening mental dossier labeled Her Decline. The Art of Withdrawal. There's an art to disappearing while staying visible. Edward began to scale back. Not from her life, but from her line of sight. He became quieter, more internal. He stopped asking where she was going. Stopped texting her during the day. Stopped initiating touch. And like a plant deprived of light, Laura didn't wither. She bloomed. She became brighter. Lighter. Like someone shedding the weight of consequence. He knew what she thought. He was fading. Bored. Distant. Preoccupied with work, maybe. Men like him didn't explode. They receded. She started staying out later. Not even bothering to text now. Just arriving home with the scent of wine and city air clinging to her coat. He stopped waiting up. Instead, he left the light on in the hallway and the door slightly ajar. Enough to suggest care, not control. He learned her patterns. Tuesdays and Thursdays she stayed out. Sundays she became overly affectionate, likely out of guilt. Saturdays she didn't wear her ring. Digital breadcrumbs. Edward wasn't a hacker. But he was thorough. And patient. He synced her old iPad, still logged into her Apple ID, with a cloud account he controlled. Over the next week, he began receiving image backups, app data, and location pings. What he saw didn't surprise him. But it still hurt. Selfies she never showed him. Dinners he never shared. Hotels he never stepped into. But most of all, it was how she looked in them. Younger. Alive. Like the person he once knew had leapt into someone else's story. He didn't cry. He compiled. He created a private folder. Phase 2, Verification. Inside, he sorted every image by location, timestamp, and participant. He tagged Ryan in each one. Compiled call logs. Monitored calendar invites. He wasn't building a case. He was building the end. Conversations with ghosts. On Thursday night, he sat across from Laura at the dinner table. He'd made pasta. Her favorite. She barely touched it. "How was work?" he asked, stirring his wine. Laura shrugged. "Exhausting. Client trouble?" "Something like that." He nodded, sipping quietly. "You're working with Ryan now, right?" The fork paused halfway to her mouth. A beat. Then another. "Ryan? Yeah? Sometimes. He's more in consulting, though." "Ah." He leaned back. "He's charismatic." She nodded slowly, chewing. "Handsome, too." A twitch. Barely there. Her jaw tightened before she caught it. "I guess," she said, voice flat. He smiled politely. "Wouldn't blame anyone for noticing." The silence that followed was intense. It was surgical. Cold. Clinical. He watched her squirm just beneath the surface, like something trapped under ice. He changed the subject. She exhaled like someone who'd dodged a bullet. She had no idea the bullet had already been fired. It just hadn't landed yet. A friend in passing. Friday afternoon, Edward met with James, an old friend from university. James was now a lawyer, the kind who dealt with white-collar crimes and non-disclosure agreements. They sat at a quiet table in a wine bar, sipping bourbon while the city hummed outside. "I need a hypothetical," Edward began, not looking up from his glass. James raised an eyebrow. "Always a fun way to start. If someone wanted to create a personal record of infidelity, both visual and digital, what are the boundaries legally? Let's say no physical confrontation. No breaking and entering. Just documentation." James whistled softly. "Well, as long as it's data collected from shared accounts, public spaces, or devices you legally have access to, you're in the clear." "But why?" Edward offered a thin smile. "Insurance. Emotional, mostly." James studied him for a long moment. "You're the calmest man I know." "That terrifies me." "Good. Testing the waters." That weekend, Edward casually mentioned to Laura that he might be traveling for work, nothing certain yet. Just talks. Potential relocation. Her reaction was strange. Not panic. Not sadness. Relief. Quickly masked, but unmistakable. "Would it be permanent?" she asked. "Could be. Promotion, different branch." "That's wow. That's amazing, Ed." He noted the way she didn't say, "We." The test confirmed what he needed to know. Her departure was already imagined. Her role in his life already reduced in her mind. He was a placeholder. Not for much longer. Intercept. On a Tuesday, he intercepted a call. Her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. He glanced. No name. Just a number. But the message preview was telling. "Miss you already? Last night was..." He didn't need to read more. He airdropped the message to his laptop. Saved it. Filed it. Then deleted it from her phone. He never checked her texts again. There was no need. The truth wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a spotlight. Blinding. A beautiful lie. Edward didn't stop being kind. He still bought flowers on Wednesdays. Still offered to make her tea when she looked tired. Still kissed her cheek when she got in the car. He wanted her to feel secure. Safe. Untouched. That was the point. She had to believe she had fooled him. She had to grow arrogant. Comfortable. Only then would her fall carry the right weight. Because Edward didn't want revenge for anger. He wanted justice. For love, betrayed. The mirror. One night, Laura stood in front of the mirror applying makeup. Edward watched her from the bed, book open in his lap. "You're glowing tonight," he said. She smiled, flattered. "Date with the girls again. I'm glad you have them." "Me too." A pause. Then, "You ever think people grow apart?" she asked suddenly. Edward closed the book. "All the time. Like, not in a bad way. Just shift. Entropy," he said softly. She frowned. "What?" "Natural decline. In physics, systems tend toward disorder unless energy is applied." Laura stared at him. "You think we're declining?" Edward smiled gently. "Only if we stop applying energy." She said nothing more. She turned away. He stared at her back, the curve of her shoulder, the stillness of her posture. He had never felt closer and further from someone at the same time. Final calibration. By the end of the month, Edward had over 100 photos. Video footage from shared spaces. Message backups. Confirmed workplace deceptions. GPS logs. Voice memos of her conversations with Ryan, recorded via the old Bluetooth speaker she still used. He didn't rage. He didn't confront. He just documented. He was the historian of his own collapse. But what came next would be something else. A narrative shift. She had taken their story and corrupted it. He would take it back. And write the ending she never saw coming. Part 3: The Setup. The game wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Edward no longer felt anger. That stage had passed. Anger was messy, volatile, uncontrollable. But strategy, that was clean. That was something you could measure. And Edward was nothing if not precise. It had been 3 weeks since he confirmed the truth. 3 weeks since he watched Laura in that red dress, twirling beside another man. 3 weeks of silence, smiles, and stillness, while beneath the surface, every wire was being pulled, every piece on the board placed exactly where he wanted. He was no longer watching her. He was orchestrating her. Step 1: False trail. The first phase of the setup required illusion. Edward needed Laura to believe he was slipping. Distracted. Fading away, emotionally and mentally. The more she believed she had won, the less she noticed the ground crumbling beneath her. He began intentionally misplacing things. Left the kettle on. Forgot his keys. Left the fridge open one night. Once, he even drove her car to work, claiming absent-mindedness. "Are you okay?" she asked once, brushing her hair, eyes flicking up in the mirror. "Just tired," he said, rubbing his temples. "Numbers don't sleep." She smiled sympathetically, then turned back to her reflection. She never asked again. Next, he stopped reacting to provocations. Laura's lies became lazier. Sloppier. One night she said she was meeting Emma from work, but Edward had already planted a fake email chain on Laura's shared laptop, claiming Emma was out of town for a conference. The trap wasn't for confrontation. It was for confidence. He was crafting the illusion of blindness. She leaned into it beautifully. Step 2: Asset diversion. Edward handled the finances. Not because he demanded control, but because Laura had always found numbers tedious. Now, that worked to his advantage. He began redirecting assets. Slowly. Carefully. He moved joint savings into a solo account under a shell name. Disentangled her name from property titles via quiet, legal restructuring through an old friend at the county office. Updated life insurance beneficiaries. He left the joint account active, with just enough activity to seem normal. Netflix, groceries, her favorite boutique subscriptions. Nothing to trigger suspicion. He wasn't preparing for confrontation. He was preparing for evacuation. Step 3: The allies. People often underestimate the importance of secondary characters. Edward didn't. He reached out, quietly, to those who mattered: her sister, her parents, her best friend from college. Never accusations. Never venom. Just slow-dripping seeds of doubt. "Hey, has Laura seemed different lately? I feel like we're drifting. Maybe I'm overthinking. She's been staying out late a lot. She says it's work. I want to trust her." They listened. They nodded sympathetically. They mirrored his concern. Some asked subtle questions in return. Others made mental notes. He didn't need them to turn against her. He needed them to watch. So when the collapse came, they wouldn't think he was cruel. They'd think he was patient. Step 4: The room. There's a room in every home where the truth hides. For Edward, it was his study. A small, spare room with one desk, 2 monitors, and a thick oak filing cabinet. Laura hadn't entered in months. That's where the folder lived. Phase 3: Collapse. Inside, time-stamped images, transcripts of phone calls, backup texts, call logs, receipts, audio files, and printed screenshots of hotel check-ins. It wasn't messy. It was archival. Clinical. Evidence not for her, but for anyone who would need to understand later. Lawyers. Family. Friends. Himself. He wasn't out for destruction. He was out for understanding. The foreshadowing. "Do you believe in karma?" he asked her one evening while slicing vegetables. Laura glanced up from her phone. "Like, what goes around comes around." He nodded. She shrugged. "Not really. People do what they do. Some get punished. Some don't." Edward smiled faintly. "Interesting. Why?" "No reason. Just something I read." She went back to scrolling. He noted the lack of curiosity. A few months ago, she would have asked what he was reading. Now, he was a backdrop. Wallpaper. Perfect. Ryan's mistake. What Edward hadn't anticipated was Ryan getting sloppy. That Tuesday, Laura was in the shower. Her phone, left on the bed, vibrated. He didn't look. He didn't have to. The preview flashed clearly. She has no idea. Friday's going to be fun, winky face. Edward didn't flinch. He didn't open the message. Instead, he logged the number, then forwarded it to a secure text replicator app installed weeks ago. He made a note in his file. April 9th, explicit message, subject confident, unaware of surveillance. It was a useful data point. Not just for exposure. For psychology. Ryan wasn't just a cheat. He was a manipulator. He'd have to be dealt with differently. Step 5: the test. Edward needed to know how deep Laura was in. So he ran a test. He told her he'd be away for the weekend, an old college friend's bachelor party out of state. Left Friday morning. Suitcase packed. Car gone. Everything rehearsed. But he didn't go far. He rented a small Airbnb 10 minutes from home. Cameras at the ready. VPN active. Monitor streaming. By 6:13 p.m. Friday night, she had a visitor. Ryan. Edward didn't record the act. He wasn't interested in voyeurism. What he watched for were patterns. They kissed like lovers, not affairs. She laughed like she used to, head back, body loose. Ryan poured wine with familiarity. Not apology. That told Edward everything. This wasn't guilt. This was replacement. Step 6: the seed. Saturday night, while they were still tangled in wine and illusion, Edward scheduled an email. He created a dummy Gmail with an innocuous name. Then attached one image. Just one. Laura in the boutique hotel lobby, kissing Ryan's cheek. Subject line. You left the curtains open. Sent. To Laura's inbox. Time, 4:01 a.m. By the time she opened it Sunday morning, Edward was already home, drinking coffee in the kitchen. She came down slowly. Pale. Jaw tight. Eyes darting. He didn't look up from the paper. Sleep okay? He asked. She nodded too quickly. Yeah. He smiled into his cup. The first crack had formed. The unspoken. Over the next week, Laura grew careful. Not apologetic. Not panicked. But cautious. Her phone less visible. Her outings more explained. Her touch more frequent. Her eyes searching, as if trying to read a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Edward played dumb. He asked about her day. Offered to cook. Kissed her forehead. She relaxed again. Mistake. Final preparation. Edward finalized his folder. Printed a clean copy. Bound it in leather. Placed it in the filing cabinet under a new label. Truth. Then he created 3 identical USB drives. One went into the home safe. The second to a friend out of state. The third into his briefcase. He wasn't paranoid. He was ready. The invitation. One Friday evening, he came home early. Laura was already dressed. Another girls' night? He asked cheerfully. She flinched but smiled. Yep. You okay with leftovers? Of course. He waited for her to leave. Then followed, just long enough to confirm her path. Then he turned back. Inside the house, he set the dining table. 2 plates. 2 glasses. The wine they had on their anniversary. Then he placed a letter on her chair. No threats. No drama. Just a note. Come home by 10. I have something for you. Part 4: the backup. Sometimes the truth doesn't hide. It waits. There was something sacred about the sound of a hard drive spinning up. To most people, it was just background noise, barely noticeable in the whir of a modern world. But to Edward, it was a promise. A quiet hum that whispered, nothing is ever truly gone. He sat in his study, the room dimly lit by the pale glow of a single desk lamp. Outside, the world was deep into the blue hour, that quiet time before night commits. On the desk before him lay an array of tools, 3 hard drives, a flash duplicator, and his old backup laptop, wiped clean and ghost-like in its emptiness. The door to the study was locked. Laura was out again. "Just dinner," she'd said. "Might be late." He didn't ask where. He hadn't asked in weeks. Because now, he wasn't curious. He was finishing. The Reaper of Data. Over the past month, Edward had collected pieces of the truth like fragments of an ancient ruin: photos, texts, GPS logs, metadata, and timestamps. But it wasn't enough. He needed a structure. A skeleton. Something that could stand on its own and scream the truth without him needing to raise his voice. He began with Laura's old MacBook, one she hadn't used in over a year. It still lived in the closet, under a stack of board games and expired tax folders. She probably didn't even remember it existed. He powered it up, bypassed the user lock with a bootable recovery drive, and accessed the iCloud cache. Within 20 minutes, the system began syncing old mail, calendar notes, app logs. Then came the gems. Conversations she never meant to save. Laura had been thorough with her secrets, on the surface. But she never factored in the sync lag between Apple's ecosystem. Edward accessed dozens of iMessages from months earlier, still present in backup form, flirty exchanges with Ryan, plans to sneak out. Even one message, dated back to January, that simply read, "He doesn't even look at me anymore. It's like I'm living with a ghost." Another reply from Ryan. "You're wasting your time on that calculator. I'll give you fire again." Edward stared at that one for a long time. Not because it hurt. Because it confirmed what he already knew. He had stopped being hers long before she started being someone else's. He copied everything. The shadow drive. Edward had always believed in redundancy. While the primary drive filled with organized folders, labeled photos, messages, logs, audio, video, social screenshots, he also mirrored everything to an encrypted secondary drive. That one would never see the light of day unless the first was destroyed. He called it the Reaper. Not out of malice. Out of function. Its job was simple: ensure the story could never be denied. Crossing the Rubicon. That evening, he made a call to a friend from college, Mark, a freelance digital forensics specialist. They hadn't spoken in years, but Edward knew the man respected discretion more than money. "Hypothetical question," Edward began, calm as ever. Mark laughed. "Sounds illegal already. If someone had messages and images, but needed metadata verification for authenticity, is that something you could handle?" "Sure. I'd need to run hashes, verify timestamps, maybe extract the EXIF data if you've got the originals." "I do." There was a pause. "You good, Ed?" "I'm just verifying truth." Mark didn't press. "Send it to the burner email." Edward already had. The photo album that wasn't. Laura kept a small wooden box on the shelf in their bedroom, between an old globe and a ceramic candle holder. Inside were printed photos, vacations, parties, random memories captured before filters and stories swallowed everything. Edward replaced 2 of them. Not with malice. With mirrors. One was of them in Venice. He swapped it with a photo of Laura and Ryan at the hotel bar, dated 4 weeks ago. The second was a beach shot. He replaced it with an image of her leaving Ryan's apartment, time-stamped and GPS tagged. The angles were similar. The lighting close. Only the subjects had changed. He didn't expect her to notice right away. But when she did, he wanted the cold flush of realization to be physical. The audio trap. Laura loved music in the shower. Always had. She'd use a small waterproof Bluetooth speaker, synced to her phone, to blast her favorite playlists while steam fogged the mirrors and the scent of lavender soaked the tiles. What she didn't know was that Edward had replaced the speaker with a near-identical model, one equipped with a passive microphone. Not to spy. To catch what she didn't say around him. Over 2 weeks, he recorded 3 full conversations between her and Ryan on speakerphone. One while she was laughing about Edward's robotic charm. Another while she told Ryan she had everything set for their next trip. The last one? He suspects nothing. I could tell him I'm seeing aliens and he'd nod and log it like an observation. It's like he's waiting to disappear. Edward saved that clip under the folder name, Final Entry. The Mirror and the Mask. The following Saturday, Edward invited Laura for dinner. Nothing unusual, just pasta, wine, and slow jazz humming from the kitchen radio. He didn't mention the file on the USB hidden in the envelope on her chair. He didn't mention the second USB copy, left with a lawyer under a sealed clause. He didn't mention anything at all. Instead, he talked about her day. Listened to her fake answers. Watched the corners of her mouth twitch every time silence stretched too long. She didn't mention the email from the dummy account. She didn't mention the photo in the box that didn't belong. But he could see it now, the fear underneath. It was settling behind her eyes. That was enough. Reaching the others. Sunday morning, Edward mailed 3 anonymous packets. Each contained a printed image, an audio transcript, and a note. Sometimes people deserve to know the full picture. Especially those they claim to love. One to her sister. One to her parents. One to her oldest friend, Natalie, the one she always swore would be her maid of honor if they ever renewed their vows. He didn't include a return address. He didn't need to. The call that didn't come. Monday passed. No call. No text. No confrontation. Laura acted normal. Or tried to. But Edward could sense it, the unease. The weight of something pending. She made coffee twice that morning and forgot to drink either. She asked him 3 times if he needed anything from the store, then didn't go. She was waiting. So was he. That night, she stood in the doorway of his study, half-shadowed. "Ed?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes?" She hesitated. Then, "Do you think we've been happy?" Edward looked up, slow and deliberate. "I think we've been quiet." "Is that the same as happy?" "No," he said softly. "But sometimes it's more useful." She didn't know how to respond. She turned and walked away. Download complete. Mark replied that night. The files were clean. Untampered. All metadata intact. Audio confirmed against known voice samples. Every timestamp verifiable. A solid case, if it ever came to that. Edward didn't feel vindicated. He felt finished. The truth had been backed up. Twice. Now came the question, what would he do with it? The letter. The following morning, Edward left a sealed envelope on Laura's nightstand before leaving for work. No drama. No ultimatum. Inside. "I know. I have known. For weeks. For months, if I'm honest. This is not revenge. This is clarity. You made your choices. I simply preserved them. Don't come looking for me when it ends. I won't be here when it begins again." Part 5: The Stranger. He didn't confront the man who stole his wife. He infiltrated his world instead. Edward had always believed that people revealed themselves most fully not in crisis, but in comfort. It was when they thought no one was watching, when they felt secure, that they truly unmasked. That's why he didn't charge into confrontation. That's why there was no dramatic showdown, no yelling in the street or late-night fists on doors. He didn't want Ryan to see him coming. He wanted Ryan to invite him in. Constructing the mask? The name was Daniel Wexler. The backstory? Simple. Quiet. Believable. Daniel was a mid-level investment consultant relocating from Chicago. New to the area. Looking to diversify assets into local ventures. Subtle air of wealth. Reserved, inquisitive. Not flashy. Not suspicious. He created the identity with surgical precision. A LinkedIn profile with connections faked through bot accounts. A prepaid phone registered to an out-of-state shell company. An email domain that looked like a boutique fund manager's firm. Then came the business card. Elegant matte black. Gold lettering. Understated. Daniel Wexler. Private capital structuring, Ventron Group. It was a name that meant nothing. Which made it perfect. Infiltration. He attended a midweek networking event at a rooftop bar downtown, one that Edward knew Ryan frequented. It was listed in the metadata of a few selfies Laura had sent to a friend months ago. Edward arrived early, scouted the crowd, and positioned himself at the bar with an open tab and a half-finished gin martini. No phone in hand. No laptop. Just watching. Ryan arrived at 7:12 p.m. Perfect timing. Confident stride. Shirt one button too low. Laughed just a decibel louder than necessary. Edward waited. At 7:26 he made his move. He timed it to interrupt a conversation Ryan was barely invested in, some startup bro pitching NFT real estate, by the sound of it. Edward drifted close, caught Ryan's eye, offered a smile. "You look like someone who appreciates actual numbers," he said. Ryan laughed. "You have no idea." The hook. They talked casually for 12 minutes. Edward played curious. Ryan played brilliant. Edward listened more than he spoke, taking care to drop only the faintest hints of wealth and potential investment interest. Just enough to pique a man like Ryan, who fed on attention and opportunity like oxygen. When Edward offered a card, Ryan took it without hesitation. "Daniel Wexler." Ryan read aloud. "Private capital, huh?" "Among other things," Edward said smoothly. "You based here?" "Just moved. Looking to plant something permanent." Ryan grinned. "Well, you're in the right place." And just like that, the gate opened. Surveillance through connection. Within days, Ryan reached out. It started with an email, casual, friendly, with a whiff of opportunism. He suggested coffee. Edward agreed. They met at a small cafe that Ryan clearly used often. He knew the barista's name, cracked a joke about a punch card he always forgot. Over espresso, they talked money. Edward let Ryan talk. He learned everything he needed in under an hour. Ryan was running a lightly masked shell company. Consulting. That functioned as a referral network for sketchy angel investors. He had access to mid-level corporate networks through personal relationships, Laura being one. He was overconfident. Sloppy. Arrogant enough to believe he was untouchable. Edward played his part perfectly. "Sounds like you've got a gold vein under you," he said. Ryan chuckled. "You just have to know where to dig." Planting the seed. It didn't take long before Ryan pitched a small cap opportunity. In medical logistics, one Edward knew to be an inflated asset dump from a collapsed holding company. He accepted the pitch. Then said no. But not bluntly. "This looks good," he said, tapping the fake documents Ryan had presented. "But I need to do due diligence." "Always do. It's a personal rule. Numbers before instinct." Ryan didn't flinch. "Of course," he said, sipping his cold brew. "We can do that." But Edward saw the flicker in his eyes. The twitch. Ryan wasn't used to being vetted. He was used to yes men. Ego-fed followers. Now Edward knew his weakness. The invitation. Friday evening. Edward received an invitation from Ryan to a small gathering at a private loft. Drinks, cigars, a few minds who actually move things. Edward accepted. He arrived in a charcoal suit, no tie, wristwatch just expensive enough to suggest affluence but not vanity. Laura wasn't there. Of course not. Ryan was too careful for that. But Ryan mentioned her. Casually. In passing. "You ever work with supply chain firms? My girl's connected with some decent talent on that side." "Your girl?" Edward echoed lightly. "Yeah. Laura. Works corporate dev for Savantis." He smiled, as if it was just another name. Edward raised an eyebrow. "Nice. That's a solid entry." "More than that," Ryan said, leaning in with a grin. "She's AF *****ing genius when she wants to be." Edward sipped his drink. He wanted to break the glass in his hand. Instead, he smiled. "You're a lucky man." Deeper in. The next day, Edward began his real work. He contacted a private investigator, not to tail Laura, but to tail Ryan. A digital sweep. Background, corporate connections, criminal whispers. The report came back within 72 hours. The findings were predictable, but useful. 3 dissolved LLCs under suspicious financial exits. A past civil suit from a former partner, settled out of court. Digital forensics linked to 2 false LinkedIn profiles tied to startup investment scams. Edward compiled it all. Created a file labeled RF Collapse. He wasn't going to expose Ryan to the world. He was going to expose Ryan to himself. A warning unspoken. They met again the following Tuesday. Edward brought a printed version of Ryan's pitch deck. He placed it on the table between them. "Let's talk through this," Edward said. "Together." Ryan grinned. He leaned in. Explained margins, predicted trends, growth rates. Edward nodded. Then said without inflection, "You mentioned Cervantes. Funny, I have a contact in compliance there. I asked about your, girl." Ryan's face twitched. "Laura? What about her?" Edward smiled faintly. "Nothing serious. Just confirming connections. Always verify the pipes before running water, right?" Ryan forced a laugh. Edward leaned back. "It's a small world," he said. "Best to know who's watching." They didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Ryan changed the subject. But Edward saw it. The doubt had been seeded. The edge of the knife. At home, Laura noticed the shift. Edward was lighter. Warmer. As if something had lifted. He complimented her more. Took her to dinner. Laughed at jokes that hadn't changed. She relaxed. She didn't realize what was happening. She was being disarmed. A stranger in his own story. One night, Edward stood in front of the mirror and stared at himself. Not at his face. At the mask. He had worn it for weeks now. Smiled through meetings. Sipped drinks with a man sleeping with his wife. Built rapport. Gained trust. He didn't recognize the reflection anymore. But he knew one thing. Daniel Wexler was almost done. And Edward was almost free. Part 6: The Truth. Some truths don't explode. They collapse everything around them. The thing about truth, Edward had come to realize, is that it doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need drama or witnesses or fists on tables. Truth is heavier than that. It arrives quietly. Like a fog rolling in over still water, soft, inevitable, impossible to ignore. And by the time you notice, everything around you is already drenched in it. Tonight, truth would arrive in silence. A perfectly ordinary morning. The day started like any other. Edward rose at 6:02. Showered. Dressed. Brewed his coffee. Same roast, same ratio, same blue ceramic mug. He read the news for 34 minutes, 58 headlines scanned, 11 opened, 2 fully read. Laura didn't come down until after 8. She wore a pale sweater and jeans that hugged her in the way she used to dress for him. Her smile was soft, unsure. Her eyes flicked over him like a photographer testing angles. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She poured coffee. Sat across from him. Fidgeted. "You have plans tonight?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. I was thinking maybe we could go out. You know. Somewhere nice." Edward sipped his coffee. "Sure." She smiled. Too quickly. He could feel it, the guilt blooming behind her ribs like a lumpful of black smoke. Something inside her knew. Maybe not consciously. But her body had registered the shift. It was the way she blinked too often. The way her knee bounced under the table. The way she reached for her cup without looking. She felt it coming. Final assembly. That afternoon, Edward took a half day from work. Not because he needed the time. Because he needed the space. In his study, he laid everything out on the desk in neat stacks. A binder labeled Primary Evidence. A leather-bound folder labeled Laura Timeline. A black envelope with a single line written across it in gold ink. If you lie, read this first. Then came the last piece, a memory drive labeled simply Watch. He placed it in the center of the table. Next, he moved to the living room. Cleaned. Lit candles. Put on soft music. Cooked her favorite meal, creamy mushroom risotto, grilled rosemary chicken, a bowl of red they'd saved. For something special. It was, in a way. 7:13 p.m. Laura walked through the door at exactly 7:13 p.m. He met her at the threshold. Kissed her cheek. Helped her out of her coat. The table was already set. The wine breathing. The lights dimmed just enough to flatter. "This looks amazing," she said, eyes darting. He nodded. "Thought we'd do something different." Dinner was pleasant. They talked about safe things. The new neighbors. A strange email she got at work. The weather. Laura asked if he'd talked to his sister. He had. She didn't ask if he knew. She was too afraid of the answer. The spark. Over dessert, chocolate mousse, her favorite, Edward leaned back. He folded his hands over his lap. Quiet. Still. Then he spoke. "I have something for you." Laura's smile faltered. "Oh?" He nodded toward the envelope on the sideboard. She hesitated. Then stood. Crossed the room. Picked it up. Held it like it might burn her. "Should I open it?" "I hope you do." She opened it slowly. Inside, a USB drive. A single card with one line. "When you're ready to tell the truth, plug this in." She turned back to him. "What is this?" "A mirror," he said softly. "Of sorts." She stared at him for a long moment. Then placed the envelope down and sat. The pause before the fall. They didn't speak for 2 minutes. The music shifted in the background, Norah Jones to something instrumental. Edward studied her. Not like a husband. Like a historian. She was unraveling in slow motion, shoulders caving, pupils shrinking, fingers curling into fists in her lap. She didn't ask what was on the drive. She knew. Somewhere inside she knew. Finally, she whispered, "How long?" "Since the socks," he said. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "You stopped wearing mismatched socks," he said. "You only did that when you were happy." She looked down. He continued. "You changed perfumes. Started locking your phone. Lied about promotions. Lied about Sarah." Her breathing quickened. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "That's a lie," he said gently. She looked up. "You didn't want to be caught. The mask falls." She stood abruptly. "Edward, what do you want from me? An apology? Do you want me to beg? You think this makes you noble?" He remained seated. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "Then why?" "I want the truth. And I want you to see it. Not for me. For you." She paced. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth?" She reached for her phone. Opened it. Froze. "What's wrong?" he asked. My camera roll's gone." "No. It's backed up. In 3 places. You're welcome." She stared at him. "Jesus." "No," he said. "Just Edward." The moment of collapse. She walked to the table. Picked up the USB drive. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she plugged it into her laptop. The screen blinked to life. A folder opened. "Watch this first." She clicked. The screen filled with a silent video, just still images, slowly fading in and out. Laura entering the hotel with Ryan. Laura laughing on his balcony. Laura kissing him on a park bench. No narration. No music. Just the weight of reality. Halfway through, she slammed the laptop shut. Edward didn't flinch. "You followed me," she breathed. "I observed." She sank into the chair. "You built this?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since you gave up on us." The question. Silence returned. Finally, Laura looked up. "Are you leaving me?" Edward tilted his head. "That depends." "On what?" On whether you want to be the person in that video, he said. Or the one I thought I married. She swallowed hard. And if I say I don't know who I am anymore? Then I suggest you watch the rest of the files. It's the only version of you that's honest. She stared at the table. Then whispered, Do you still love me? He didn't answer. Not right away. Then, softly, I mourned you. Love was buried with who you used to be. The exit. He stood. Gathered the binder. The files. The copies. Left the envelope. Then turned to her. I'm staying at the Riverton, he said. For now. I've left no notes. No messages. You'll tell your own story however you choose. She looked up, eyes rimmed with tears. Why aren't you angry? I was, he said. But I chose truth instead. He opened the door. Paused. Then said, This isn't punishment, Laura. This is the echo of every lie. And with that, he left. Part 7. The silence before the storm. It's not the thunder that destroys you. It's the moment before, when you know it's coming. Laura didn't cry that night. She sat on the living room floor in complete stillness, the laptop open on the coffee table, the screen black now but still warm. Around her, the house breathed its usual evening rhythm. Wood creaked, pipes moaned, the faint hum of the fridge filled the space between thoughts. But nothing inside her moved. Her body was still. Her mind wasn't. She had opened every folder Edward left. She had watched the videos. Read the transcripts. Seen the names, the dates, the photographs from angles she didn't know existed. She had heard her own voice saying things she barely remembered, things she would have denied had they not been captured with such impossible clarity. And now she sat in the middle of her life, realizing it wasn't hers anymore. The echo. The next morning, she woke up on the floor. For a brief second, she thought Edward would be beside her. He always woke earlier than her. She used to joke that he moved through the house like mist, always already halfway through his first cup of coffee by the time she rubbed sleep from her eyes. But there was no coffee this morning. No sound. No presence. Just the echo of herself. A strange quiet. The house felt wrong now. Not empty, stripped. She moved through it like a stranger, pausing in doorways she never noticed before, staring too long at walls that had once held meaning. The photos were still up. The books still alphabetized. His coat still hung by the door. But the energy had shifted. It was no longer a shared space. It was an exhibit. Every room held a whisper, he knew. He saw. He waited. And you kept lying. The mirror. In the bathroom, Laura looked at herself in the mirror. It wasn't her. The woman staring back looked tired. Older. Her skin pale, eyes sunken, mascara faintly smudged at the corners like ink bleeding through old paper. She leaned closer. When did it start? Not the affair. The distance. She used to touch him just because. Reach across the dinner table for no reason but reassurance. She used to crawl into his lap while he worked and read aloud from books they never finished. She used to know him. And somewhere, it had all gone silent. Not because he changed. Because she stopped listening. The first collapse. At 10:43 a.m., her phone rang. It was Natalie. Her oldest friend. She stared at the screen for several seconds, hand trembling slightly, then picked up. Hey, she said, voice carefully casual. There was a pause on the other end. Then, flatly, Is it true? Laura closed her eyes. Natalie, I don't know what you've seen or... I saw enough. Silence. I didn't know how to explain it. Laura said softly. You didn't explain it at all. Natalie replied. He did. Click. The call ended. Laura lowered the phone, staring at the screen. Then she screamed. Loud. Wordless. Shattering. The visitors. That afternoon, her sister called. Then her mother. Then her father. None of them were angry. They were disappointed. That hurt more. She wanted to scream that it wasn't all her fault, That marriage is complicated. That she'd been lonely. Forgotten. Replaced. But she had no proof of that. And he had all the proof of everything else. Watching from afar. Edward watched it unfold from a distance. Not gleefully. Not cruelly. Just, inevitably. He stayed in a hotel 3 blocks from their home, in a quiet room with soft lighting and a view of the city that felt neutral. Impartial. He read the paper in the mornings. Ate alone. Walked without direction. And each night, he opened his laptop, checked the remote logs, and saw the signs. She had accessed the folder titled Phase 3, Internal Collapse. She had copied the file labeled Unsent Drafts into a new document titled Me. She had replayed the conversation recordings. Twice. She was unraveling. But not aimlessly. She was listening. For the first time in years. An email. On the 3rd day, Laura sent an email. No subject. Just a line of text. What do you want from me? Edward stared at it for a long time. He didn't reply. The apartment. On the 4th day, she found him. She didn't knock. Didn't call. She just stood outside the lobby until the concierge called his room. She says she's your wife. The man said, unsure. She used to be. Edward replied. A pause. Then, should I send her up? Edward hesitated. Then said, give her 3 minutes. The confrontation without fury. She stood at the threshold, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. No makeup. No jewelry. A hoodie and jeans. Hair pulled back. Real. Hi, she said softly. Come in. She entered slowly, carefully, like someone stepping into a hospital room. She didn't sit. I didn't come to justify. She said. Good. I didn't come to beg. Also good. I came to ask why you didn't leave sooner. Edward looked at her for a long time. Then said, because I wasn't done loving you. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then the tears came. Slow. Reluctant. Do you hate me? No, he said. I remember you. I hate who you became. The final file. He handed her a final envelope. Inside. A signed separation agreement. A list of therapy referrals. A handwritten letter. She didn't open it. Not there. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know. He opened the door for her. She looked back once. But he had already turned away. That night. Edward walked the city until midnight. When he returned to his room, the lights were off. But on his nightstand was a note. No signature. No envelope. Just one line. Thank you for making me see myself. Part 8. The first move. It wasn't revenge. It was math. Edward always believed that justice wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. There was a difference between rage and order. Rage burned everything. But order? Order recalibrated. It took chaos and whispered, now you sit down. And today, Ryan was going to sit down. He just didn't know it yet. The map. The first time Edward had seen Ryan's face, it was at a mutual friend's gathering. Back then, Ryan was just a name attached to an expensive watch and a handshake 2 seconds too long. A smirk with no context. Laura had introduced them, casual, too casual. Oh, you two haven't met yet? That night had been a ripple. Now, the wave was coming. Edward spread out the documents across the table of his hotel room. It looked like a war map. Names. Dates. Company filings. Email transcripts. Banking leaks. Investment prospectuses. Screenshots of encrypted chats. This wasn't blackmail. This was accountability. Target, Ryan Fletcher. Ryan operated like many overconfident men do, loud on the surface, hollow underneath. He thrived in gray areas. Name-dropping founders he barely knew. Pitching emerging market tech. From laptops paid for with borrowed money. But Edward had traced the footprints. Ryan's entire empire was built on suggestion and implication. And Edward had just verified every unspoken promise Ryan had ever made, and proven them false. The trigger. Edward made his first move with a single email. It went out Monday morning at 8:01 a.m. to the CFO of a biotech company Ryan had been trying to pitch. The risk assessment lead at an investor group Ryan had fraudulently name-dropped. A quietly concerned former partner of Ryan's, one who had settled out of court 3 years ago, and who still had a grudge to feed. Subject: request for confirmation concerning activities of Mr. R. Fletcher. Attached: a PDF dossier summarizing Ryan's financial inconsistencies. A sanitized, legally reviewed, summary of civil case references. A brief timeline of Ryan's recent connections and pitches. Several quotes from Ryan's own emails and voice messages, redacted for privacy, highlighting deceptive practices. There was no threat. No demand. Just a mirror. This is who you're trusting. The ripple begins. Within 36 hours, Ryan received a politely worded email from a funding firm he'd been courting for 6 weeks. We've decided to pause further discussion until internal risk reviews are completed. Appreciate your time. The message was vague. But Edward knew the language. It meant, we're walking away. And we're not saying why, because we don't want you calling. 3 other threads dropped off by Wednesday. By Friday, 2 separate clients had requested clarification on Ryan's compliance policies. Edward wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was playing chess from 3 boards away. The ally. Edward didn't work alone. He reached out to someone who had once considered suing Ryan for embezzlement, a man named Caleb Young, who now ran his own small firm. They had never met in person. But the moment Edward shared the timeline of connections between Laura, Cervantes, and Ryan's pitches, Caleb's response came in all caps. This is what we needed 3 years ago. They spoke for 2 hours. By the end of the call, Caleb had agreed to take the full report to a lawyer who still had an open file with Ryan's name in it. The new angle, using employee data from Laura's firm, was a breach no NDAs could cover. Edward thanked him. Then he closed his laptop and made tea. There was no celebration. Just progress. The silence from Laura. Since their final meeting at the hotel, Laura hadn't contacted him again. No calls. No messages. No emails. But he knew what she was doing. She had taken the therapy referral list he'd left. He confirmed it, quietly, respectfully, through the clinic's system when one of the admin assistants, a friend from college, mentioned an intake under her name. It meant she was trying. That was all he needed. Not forgiveness. Just proof that she had to face herself without dragging him down with her anymore. The anonymous drop. The final play came with no fanfare. Edward packaged an anonymous report under the pseudonym InvestorInsight_2073 and uploaded it to a private forum used by high-level risk analysts and boutique VC gatekeepers. It was a standard community post format. Title: Concerning Emerging Pattern in RF, Advisory Discretion Recommended. Content: a factual timeline. No accusations. No slander. Just links, dates, quotes. Format plain. Professional. Clinical. He knew it would spread. The people who moved money knew how to read shadows. They didn't need fire. They needed smoke. The collapse begins. On a rainy Thursday evening, Edward sat in a corner table at a jazz bar, sipping his usual neat bourbon, when his phone buzzed. A news alert. Just a small one. Fletcher Group pulls out of pending deal amid sudden restructuring review. That was all it said. No names. No drama. But Edward smiled, just barely. Not because Ryan was falling, but because no one would ever know who pushed him. Laura's message. That night, at 11:34 p.m., his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Laura. I heard about Ryan. I don't need to ask. I know. I'm not reaching out to get you back. I just want you to know, I would have never had the strength to face myself if you hadn't made me see what I had become. Whatever you did, I hope it brought you peace. Edward stared at the screen, then deleted the message. He had peace. And it didn't come from watching anyone suffer. It came from knowing he didn't have to suffer anymore. The letter that was never sent. Weeks earlier, Edward had written a letter. He hadn't intended to send it. But he had written it anyway. To Ryan. It read, "You didn't steal my wife. You sold her a version of herself she wasn't brave enough to earn. You gave her easy flattery and got cheap sex in return. What you never got, what you couldn't get, was me. Because I'm not yours to beat. Not even in this. I washed you. I walked through your world. And I walked out without a scratch. You will spend years wondering when the next mirror drops. I won't even remember your face. E." He folded the letter and burned it in a glass ashtray 2 days before the first deal dropped. Because the point wasn't the warning. The point was the silence that followed it. The quiet victory. Edward didn't return to the old house. He left the keys with a real estate firm and requested quiet management until Laura made a decision. Sell. Rent. Restore. Whatever she chose, it was hers now. He took a new apartment across town. Smaller. Cleaner. He didn't buy a television. He got a dog instead. A rescue, with sad eyes and a crooked tail. He named him Benson, after the jazz musician who always played in that bar. And every night they walked in silence. Past places that used to hurt. Now just places. Part 9, The Fall of the Mask. When the truth cracks the mirror, even your own reflection turns against you. The first thing Laura lost was the silence. She'd always depended on it. The soft, inoffensive lull of professional small talk, passive nods in meetings, the gentle hum of office air conditioning, a soundscape where no one asked real questions. No one looked too closely. But that changed the morning she walked into the office and people stopped pretending. It was subtle at first. A longer pause when she entered the break room. A slackening of smiles when she passed by. No whispers, just that unnatural hush, the kind that tells you you've become a story someone is trying not to tell too loudly. And she felt it. The way someone feels glass cracking beneath their feet. HR. By noon, she was called into HR. Just a check-in, they said. The woman across the desk was overly kind, the way people are when they know something and you don't yet know they know it. We've received a few messages. The HR manager began. Nothing official. Just concerns. About what? Laura asked too quickly. The woman opened a folder. Inside, printed screenshots of conversations. Not explicit. But real. Unmistakably her name. Ryan's name. Work email domains. Inferred influence. Risk. Nothing in here violates policy, yet, the HR woman said slowly. But optics matter. Laura didn't respond. She was too busy calculating which part of her story had made it out there. Natalie. That evening, Laura called Natalie. Voicemail. She sent a text. Can we talk? Please? No reply. The next day, she checked social media. Natalie had unfollowed her. So had 2 other friends she'd known for a decade. She clicked on a group photo from a trip to New York 3 years ago. It had over 40 comments the last time she checked. Now it had 12. And a new top comment from someone she didn't know. Yikes. The Whisper Network. Laura had always moved through the world with a curated grace. She was liked. Not adored. Not feared. But trusted. Relied on. She was the woman people asked to organize baby showers at work, to mentor new hires, to explain passive-aggressive emails in plain English. But now that version of her was unraveling. One day, she overheard 2 interns whispering in the bathroom. She's the one, right? With that guy from, what's the name? No, not the investor. That was before. You sure? I heard. They stopped when she walked out. She smiled. Didn't say a word. But something in her died a little more. The email. On Friday morning, she received an email from a woman she barely knew. Subject: You don't know me, but I thought you should know. The message was short. Ryan's been here before. You're not the first. And you won't be the last. Just thought you deserved to hear that from someone not trying to destroy you. Laura read it 5 times. Then closed her laptop. The apartment. The house felt wrong now. Too big. Too hollow. Edward had been gone for weeks, but his presence still haunted the corners. The coffee mug he always used sat in the back of the cabinet like a ghost. His book on the nightstand hadn't moved. And every room whispered the same thing. He knew. He waited. You kept lying. She spent her nights on the couch now. Couldn't bring herself to sleep in their bed. The confrontation. She saw Ryan again. Once. He texted. Need to talk. You around? She said yes. Not because she wanted him. Because she needed to understand. They met at a bar near his apartment. He wore sunglasses indoors. She didn't ask why. I'm getting calls, he said, skipping pleasantries. Emails. Some things out there. Not just about me. About us. I know, she said. Did you tell someone? She laughed, humorless. Edward told everyone without saying a word. Ryan leaned forward. You need to talk to him. Tell him to stop. Laura shook her head. He already has. Ryan looked at her, confused. He's not trying to destroy you, she said. He's just letting you collapse on your own. He stared at her. Then, colder. You were in this too. She met his gaze. No. I was in him. You were just a way to run away from myself. She stood. Left. And didn't turn around. The interview. Monday. A job interview. She needed out? A fresh start. Something to replace the crumbling walls of Cervantes. The recruiter smiled. Asked about her experience. Her growth. Her leadership style. Then leaned back and said, We've had an anonymous report about an alleged breach of confidentiality. Nothing verifiable. Just a flag. Laura froze. Would you like to address it? She smiled. Said something about professional integrity. But her voice was hollow. The recruiter nodded. Politely. She never heard from them again. The journal. She started writing. It began as a blank notebook she found in the kitchen drawer. Something Edward had probably bought and never used. She wrote one word on the first page. Why? Then another. Me. Then, who was I? She filled 16 pages in 3 days. No answers. But finally, honest questions. The therapist. 2 weeks into the fallout, she showed up at a clinic listed on the paper Edward had left. She sat in the waiting room and picked at a hangnail until a woman in a navy blazer called her name. Inside, the therapist asked her to start anywhere. Laura said, I don't know if I want to fix my marriage. I don't even know if I deserve to. But I know I don't want to be this person anymore. That was enough. For now. Edward. She passed him once on the street. Pure chance. He was walking a dog. A rescue, by the look of it. Crooked tail, soulful eyes. He didn't see her. Or maybe he did and didn't care. She watched him for a moment. He was smiling. Not at her. Just smiling. It felt like watching someone finally exhale. Her own letter. That night, she wrote Edward a letter. Not to ask him back. Not to plead. Just to say, you were right. The truth wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I was too scared to choose. I don't expect you to read this. But if you do, thank you. For the mirror. And the silence. And the grace. She didn't send it. She folded it. Placed it in the back of the same drawer where she found the notebook. Then closed it. Softly. Part 10, The Aftershock. Destruction is loud. But healing? Healing is quiet. The thing about silence, Edward realized, is that it changes shape. In the beginning, silence was a cage. It echoed with things unsaid, pressed against the back of his throat like a scream held too long. It rang in his ears at night when the absence of Laura's voice, her breath, her footsteps, felt like a missing limb. But now, silence had softened. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. New rhythms. He woke before dawn, as he always had. Only now, there was no need to be quiet. No need to tiptoe past shared walls or whisper over the hum of a sleeping house. The apartment was small, uncluttered. Bare wood floors. Books arranged not alphabetically, but emotionally, what he needed to feel, not what he wanted to know. He fed Benson, the rescued dog who had learned to mirror his stillness. Then brewed coffee the way he liked, extra strong, 2 sugars, 1 ritual. He sat by the window, mug in hand, and didn't think about her. Most mornings. The letter. He still hadn't opened the last envelope Laura sent. She hadn't sent it by mail. She'd walked to the hotel herself and left it with the concierge in a plain manila folder. She hadn't asked for it to be delivered. She just said, "If he wants it, he'll ask." He never asked. But he took it anyway. It sat in the second drawer of his desk, under tax receipts and warranty manuals, like a sealed fragment of another life. Sometimes, late at night, he'd open the drawer, touch the corner of the envelope, think about what it might say, then close it. He didn't need more words. He had truth. Meanwhile, Laura's days became quieter too. Not by choice. She'd taken leave from her job. Officially it was temporary personal leave for emotional health. Unofficially it was time to let the whispers fade. She used to have a calendar full of engagements, work dinners, girls' nights, weekend brunches. Now, she filled her days with long walks and books she never finished. She still lived in the house. It didn't feel like hers. But it didn't feel like his either anymore. That was the strangest part. It was no one's home now. Just a space waiting to be decided. Therapy. Her therapist's name was Celia. Mid-40s. Soft voice. Sharp eyes. On their 5th session, Celia asked, "What was the first lie?" Laura didn't blink. "That I was happy." The 6th session. "What was the second?" "That it was his fault." By the 7th, they were talking about her father. And control. And the kind of love that felt earned instead of given. The kind that made her flinch when things were still. "You feared peace," Celia said. "I hated it," Laura replied. "Because I didn't think I deserved it." Letters never sent. She started writing to Edward again. Not to send them. Just to remember what it felt like to speak without pretending. One letter began. "You gave me every chance to turn around, and I walked further instead. I think I wanted to be caught. I think I wanted to be punished. But you didn't punish me. You just showed me who I was. And that's worse. Because now I can't unsee it." Another ended. "I hope you forget my name. And I hope that forgetting is soft." She tore that one up. Some things don't need to survive. Edward's evenings. Edward started volunteering on Thursdays. A local shelter needed someone to help with intake data and inventory. Not glamorous. But it helped. He didn't talk about himself. Didn't talk much at all. He liked the quiet of it. The weightless responsibility. Here, no one asked about the past. No one knew what he'd endured. He was just Edward. A man with gentle eyes and a calm voice who liked things to be in the right place. One evening, a volunteer named Nina asked, "You always this quiet?" He smiled. "No. I used to be quieter." The coffee shop. He saw Laura once more. Not planned. Not dramatic. He was walking out of a bookstore. She was sitting in the window of a cafe across the street, a cup in both hands, staring at nothing in particular. She looked older. Not aged. Just real. The version of her that had stopped hiding from herself. He didn't wave. She didn't look up. And that was okay. The message that didn't need a reply. Weeks later, Laura sent one final message. I still think about what you said. That you mourned me. I think you were right. I think I had died long before the truth caught up to me. But I'm learning how to be born again. Thank you for letting me live. Edward read it once, then archived it. Peace didn't always need acknowledgement. The sound of moving on. Months passed. Benson grew older. Grayer at the ears. Smarter. More loyal. Edward redecorated the apartment. Added a couch that actually felt like his. Took down the clock that ticked too loud. Bought a second plant. Started cooking again, not just for function, but for joy. One Saturday morning, he met a woman named Dana at a community book swap. They talked about travel. About solitude. About the difference between being alone and being ready. He didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel fear. He just listened. And when she smiled at him like he was safe, he didn't flinch. Laura's apartment. Laura moved out of the house in late spring. Found a small apartment near the lake. The kind of place that echoed when she spoke too loudly, but in a comforting way. Like the walls hadn't yet formed expectations of her. She kept it minimal. 2 mugs. 1 set of plates. No pictures on the wall. She didn't bring the old life with her. Not even the books. She started over. From empty. And for the first time in years, that didn't scare her. Endings. People think betrayal ends with the argument. Or the divorce. Or the slam of a door. But it doesn't. It ends with the quiet. With the life you choose after. With the person you become when you realize that forgiveness isn't something someone gives you. It's something you give yourself by not staying the same. Part 11. The Return. She didn't come to ask for anything. She came to prove she didn't need to. The knock on Edward's door was soft. Not the kind that demanded attention, or the kind that feared rejection. It was in between. A knock that knew it had no right to be there, but came anyway. He didn't check the peephole. He knew. He opened the door slowly, bracing himself not against rage or sadness, but the weight of memory. There she stood. Laura. Same eyes. Different woman. Hair pulled back, no makeup. Just a dark sweater, jeans, hands clasped like she was still learning how to hold herself in place. Hi, she said. He stepped aside without a word. She entered quietly, and the door closed behind them like punctuation on a sentence they hadn't finished. The apartment. Edward's apartment was warm. Not decorative. Not stylish. But honest. Books on the windowsill. A bowl for Benson's leash by the door. A blanket folded on the couch in a way that suggested it had been used just hours ago. It was, she realized, the first space she'd ever seen him live in without her. And yet, it felt more like him than anything she remembered. He gestured to the chair across from his. She sat. Benson approached slowly, tail low. She reached a hand forward. He sniffed. Then turned and walked back to Edward's side. She smiled. Smart dog. Edward gave a soft nod. He reads people. The first silence. They sat for a long while. Not awkwardly. Just wordless. Then she spoke. I'm not here to ask for anything. He nodded. I know. I'm not here to justify anything either. Good. She took a breath. I'm here because I needed to say the things I never had the courage to say when they still mattered. His expression didn't change. But he leaned back, folded his hands. I'm listening. The confession. I've spent the last 6 months undoing the version of me I became while I was with you. She swallowed. Not because you made me that way. Because I didn't know how to be anything else once I stopped trying. She looked down at her hands. You were good to me. Better than I knew how to hold. You gave me consistency, and I mistook it for distance. You gave me patience, and I mistook it for indifference. You gave me truth, and I ran from it until it tore everything apart. Her voice didn't shake. But her hands did. The reflection. I thought love had to be dramatic. Loud. Chaotic. Because that's what I saw growing up. That's what I learned. She looked up. But you were quiet. Steady. You didn't shout. You just stayed. Until you didn't. He still hadn't spoken. She appreciated that. Silence was more honest than forgiveness could be. I hated that you didn't fall apart when you found out. That you didn't scream, or cry, or break something. She gave a hollow smile. But now I know, that's because you already had. You just did it before I ever realized what I'd done. His turn. Edward shifted in his chair. Do you know what the worst part was? He said, voice calm. She shook her head. It wasn't the lying. Or the cheating. Or even Ryan. His voice didn't rise. It was steady, like the tide pulling back from a shore. It was realizing you knew I was still trying. That I was watching us fall, and you let me keep reaching anyway. She didn't interrupt. I would have forgiven you. Maybe not for what you did, but for why you did it. If you just turned around. Even once. He looked her in the eyes. But you didn't. The letter. She reached into her coat. Pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I wrote this 100 times. Burned it 99. She placed it on the table between them. I don't need you to read it now. Or ever. I just needed to give it to you. He looked at it. Didn't touch it. Not yet. She didn't expect him to. The regret that doesn't beg. I'm not here to ask for us back, she said. I know. I'm not here to tell you I've changed. I wouldn't believe it. I just wanted to stand in front of you as the woman I should have been, if only to prove to myself that I could. Edward nodded slowly. That version of you was always there. She smiled. A real one. I just never knew how to hold her long enough to bring her home. Closure. After a long pause, he stood. Walked to the window. Looked out at the city below, lights flickering in the distance like possibilities too far away to name. She stood too. I'll go now. He turned, finally reaching for the letter. Their fingers didn't touch. But they weren't far. Take care of yourself, Edward. You too, Laura. She stepped toward the door. Paused. Then said, You were the best thing in my life. And I failed you. He gave the smallest smile. No. You failed you. I just got caught in the fallout. She didn't cry. He didn't ask her to stay. She left. The final word. That night, Edward sat in his chair, the letter unopened on his lap. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. Some truths weren't meant to be seen again, only acknowledged. He stood, walked to his bookshelf, and slid the letter into a volume of poetry he hadn't touched in years. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Just filed away. Like a chapter whose ending had finally been written. And elsewhere. Laura walked 5 blocks before realizing she'd been holding her breath since she left his door. She stopped. Looked up at the sky. It was just beginning to snow. No dramatic gusts. No swirling chaos. Just soft flakes, falling without needing attention. And for the first time in a long, long while, she felt like she could breathe. Part 12. The End/A New Beginning. The past doesn't vanish. But it stops waiting at the door. Edward didn't mark the day the story ended. There was no red circle on the calendar, no glass raised, no ceremonial closure. There was only a morning like any other. Coffee brewed. Benson fed. The light from the kitchen window falling across the hardwood in long gold streaks. A Tuesday, maybe? Or a Thursday. It didn't matter. It was just quiet. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to listen for footsteps that would never come. Life after. Healing never announces itself. It doesn't burst in with a sunrise or hand you a certificate stamped. Closure. It happens in the background. Between grocery trips and casual texts with friends. Between the second and third cup of coffee. It lives in small, forgettable choices. Like buying new towels in a color you never would have picked before, or deciding not to reread the letter someone left behind. Edward didn't reread Laura's letter. He hadn't read it once. It still sat tucked inside the poetry book on the second shelf, its edges slightly softened by time. He'd moved the book twice during spring cleaning, never opening it. Not because he feared what was inside. Because he no longer needed to hear what it said. Dana. Dana had become a more consistent presence. Not a lover, not yet. Not quite. More like a companion in motion. Someone to walk with. Talk to. Sit beside on Sundays when the sun lingered a little longer in the sky. She didn't ask much about his past. He didn't offer much. And that was their unspoken agreement. They met in the now, not the then. She once told him, "You have the kind of eyes that look like they've said goodbye too many times." He smiled. Didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. He was learning that not every truth needed an audience. Benson. The dog had become his best friend. Steady. Loyal. Wordless. The kind of company that asked for nothing but presence, and responded with more sincerity than most humans could manage. Benson seemed to know when Edward needed space. And when he didn't. Some nights, Edward would sit on the balcony with a book, Benson at his feet, and simply watch the city breathe. Lights flickering. Lives happening. All without him. And that, too, was peace. The letter that never came. Edward never heard from Laura again after her final visit. No follow-up. No lingering texts. No attempts at birthday messages or "hope you're well" platitudes. And that, in itself, was a gift. Not because it meant she didn't care, but because it meant she understood. Some stories don't require sequels. Elsewhere. Laura had moved again. Not far, just closer to the lake. Her apartment was smaller, but brighter. Filled with second-hand furniture that didn't match, and books she actually read this time. She'd kept her job, not the old one. A new one. Marketing at a nonprofit. It paid less, but she no longer came home feeling like she had to put on another mask. She'd made a few new friends. Lost a few old ones. And every so often she'd find herself staring out the window, wondering not what Edward was doing, but if he had found the same quiet she now felt in her bones. Not silence. Peace. One final letter. She wrote him once more. But never sent it. Instead, she folded it into her journal and wrote at the bottom in blue ink, "For my own forgiveness." The letter read, "I used to think closure meant you forgave me. I know better now. Closure was me forgiving myself, and finally understanding why you never shouted. Because you knew I wasn't listening anyway. But I am now. I will be for the rest of my life." She closed the journal. Filed it. Moved forward. The stranger. One evening in late summer, Edward was walking through a local art festival when a stranger stopped him. "Excuse me," she said, holding a camera. "Do you mind if I take your photo? There's something anchored about you." He blinked. Laughed softly. "Anchored?" She smiled. "Like someone who's not waiting on anything anymore." He tilted his head. Considered it. Then said, "Sure." She took the photo. Thanked him. Walked away. He never saw the image. Didn't need to. Someone had looked at him and seen not loss. Not betrayal. But solidity. That was enough. Dana again. Months later, Dana came over with soup. She had a key now. She made too much of everything and never brought the same wine twice. They sat on the couch, eating slowly, watching a rerun of a show either of them cared about. Halfway through the second bowl, she asked, "Did you love her?" Edward didn't answer right away. Then, "Yes." She nodded. "That doesn't scare me," she said. He smiled. "I'm glad." And that was the last time they ever spoke of Laura. The box. Eventually, Edward cleaned out the last drawer in the desk. Inside, old pens, expired receipts, one unopened envelope, and a pair of cufflinks he hadn't worn since the last wedding they attended together. He stared at them for a moment. Then placed them in a small wooden box. Not to keep them close. Just to put them somewhere they could stay. The envelope he burned. No malice. No finality. Just warmth and ash. Like something that had already ended, finally catching up to itself. The final walk. On a quiet November morning, Edward and Benson walked along the river. The trees were mostly bare, the air crisp but not bitter. Leaves crunched underfoot. Children laughed in the distance. Somewhere, a saxophone played from a speaker left on a balcony. Edward paused by the edge of the water, watched the light shift over the ripples, and smiled. Because for the first time since that first suspicion, since the first deviation from the pattern, he didn't feel like a man surviving a story. He felt like a man living one. Final line. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't forgetting. This wasn't revenge. This was just a man, a dog, a river, and a life. Finally his again. Thank you for being with us on Whisper's Secrets. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The secrets are waiting to be revealed. See you soon.